let's get started. Good morning to you all, or good afternoon, according to your area. Today, we are going to get started with our work with this panel on service learning as a path to spirituality. We hope this is a space for us to reflect and to share, to fill up with energy in these pandemic times, and to reflect on how service learning is a path to spirituality. We request you kindly to remember that there's translation going on into Portuguese, into English, and into Spanish. We have information on the page where you can click in order to change translation, to select your language. I'm Chantal Joannet. I'm the director of the Research Center at the Catholic University of Chile, and I take part in the Uniservitate project. Just so you know, and I invite the audience to be very active, authors will have 10 minutes for their presentation. And towards the end, the chat will be activated and you will be able to ask questions. Summary papers are on the webpage of the Congress with all the authors, and this is where you will be able to find that information. Please mute your microphones as the session goes on. The order of presentations is the following, just so you know what your turn will be and who you will be listening to. So let's get started with Ellen Van Stichel. She will be talking about service learning as a response to the Church's call for justice, peace, and sustainable development from the Leuven University from Belgium. Ellen, you can take the floor. You are assigned 10 minutes.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you. And thank you very much for including me here. I'm very happy to be part of this symposium and of this panel. If everything goes well, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Yeah, here we go. I'm gonna do it like this, I guess.
It's okay, Ellen.
Okay, so based on the commandment to love God and one's neighbor, the Church is called to give witness of its faith in the public realm. This justifies why service learning matters for Catholic higher education. What are the implications of this link as seen in Catholic social teachings call for justice, peace, and sustainable development? And lastly, how does this consequently inform the concrete implementation of service learning? These are the questions that I want to tackle here. First, I want to start from the underlying premise that there exists an unbreakable link between professing one's faith and acting on it, which explains why service learning matters for Catholic higher education in the first place. Exactly 5 decades ago, the bishops of the Synod of Bishops proclaimed in their document Justice in the World, action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as a constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel. And Pope Francis continues to remind us of this statement and of this link. A key theological argument for this link is to be found in the Bible, which discloses God as a God of the living who is, quote, close enough to touch, in the words of the Dominican Edward Schillebeeckx. Moreover, God is actively committed to this world as everything is supported by God's absolute saving presence. And this divine salvation is not exclusivist, but universal. Neither is it merely eschatological, but it is already perceptible in the present. It is spiritual, but also material, and thus takes all aspects of human flourishing into account. In other words, from this perspective, service is a way of finding and encountering God. Hence the second question, what are the implications of the link as seen in Catholic social teachings call for justice, sustainable development, and peace? First, what concept of justice do we aim to realize? Let's take a look at the Bible. When confronted with the Anawim, which means literally the small, those who are overwhelmed by need, the Bible calls on God's people to provide justice. namely by restoring right relationships, treating each other with love and justice as God is loving and just. Commonly understood as giving to each his or her due, justice is often conceived, as the image shows, as something measurable that can be balanced, symbolized by the Lady Justice with her blindfold and scales. Biblical justice, however, is the justice of the Magnificat, which is not impartial but partial, as its benchmark for measuring the level of justice in a society is its treatment of the most vulnerable. Moreover, these vulnerable people should not be treated as objects of assistance, but as subjects. There should be no power over, but rather power with, in order to work together in for participation, inclusion, and co-creation. Hence, human flourishing, as well as the relationality among people, is the key component of a Christian notion of justice. To use a metaphor, it is not about shaping our common life and society as a hotel in which various groups are giving their own space in which to build their good life separately from each other, characterized by non-interference and possibly indifference, but rather we are looking for a society as a house we build together. Second, in recent years, Pope Francis has taken this relational understanding a step further with the notion of integral ecology. In a first sense, integral ecology means that concern for the environment on the one hand and commitment for inclusion and the struggle against poverty on the other hand are two sides of the same coin. Both the environment and the most vulnerable on our planet are victims of a wasteful and disposable society. A closer look shows how integral ecology also expresses a deeper theological vision, particularly a relational vision in which everything, the fate of human beings and the rest of creation, is interconnected and interdependent. And from this relational perspective, Francis calls for practical community conversion, so that the human flourishing and the flourishing of all creation will be the good life for all or for no one. And spirituality appears to be key here because in whatever form, it considers the interconnectedness between people and the environment, and it can help to keep one's spirits up, even if the situation seems rather hopeless. We are in this together, carried and supported by God, who is present in our midst. Third, for
Helen,
Catholic social...
Helen, disculpa. ¿Podrías colocar
Helen, could you please show the presentation in a wide manner?
Yeah, but wait a second.
And this is the interpreter's request. Could you read slower, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Third, for Catholic social teaching, peace
Could you read slower, please?
Yeah, I was doing so. Third, for Catholic social teaching, peace and justice are also interrelated. In the absence of justice, for instance, in situations of gross inequality, it's hardly surprisingly that it gives rise to a violent response. Hence the idea, if you want peace, work for justice. This explains Pope Francis' focus on the importance of fraternity. Already in 2014, Pope Francis proclaimed, "Fraternity extinguishes war and is the foundation and pathway to peace." In his latest encyclical, he considers fraternity the proverbial vaccine. Confronted with huge fragmentation, increasing nationalism, and the closing of borders and minds, Pope Francis calls for a fraternity which does not merely consider others as associates, but as true neighbors. In this light, the notion of the culture of encounter shows its importance as a way to foster such fraternity. Fostered by attitudes of openness, receptivity, and humility, such encounter helps people to accept diversity, create relationships of belonging, and become willing to cooperate for the global common good, which excludes no one. As encounter, it implies a revolution of tenderness, a fraternity which is direct and interpersonal. But as a culture of encounter, it is also social, institutional, and it is an ecclesial undertaking. Because rather than hiding behind its walls, the church should take the risk of being bruised and changed and enriched by the encounter of others. So briefly, and that is my conclusion, what are the implications for service learning? Whatever the kind of commitment, service learning should never be unidirectional, never an exercise where the haves help the have-nots. Relational reciprocity is fundamental. If justice is relational, the question for service learning should be, which relationships do we develop through our service learning? Secondly, service learning contributes to the much needed community conversion. And reflection is a crucial part in it because it offers a perfect opportunity to reflect on the broader worldview and paradigms underlying our current neoliberal culture. At a deeper level, this reflection can foster an awareness and integration of one's personal spirituality and worldview. What is my particular calling and my task in this world? What are the sources of my motivation? What are my desires and dreams, but also my fears? And at which point am I vulnerable? And fourthly, although students engaged in service learning might not be directly involved in peace building, every time service learning challenges them to go to the margins, get out of their comfort zones, encounter people and concerns they might otherwise never encounter, we are fostering mutual understanding, dialogue, and thus, in the end, peace. I would hope service learning can move students from possible indifference to increased indignation, with an open yes to envision another future. Move them beyond the confines of their comfort zones to feel engaged with people, situations, and social problems that they may have initially thought were none of their concern. Service learning, which responds to the Church's call of justice, peace, and sustainable development, and makes them hear this call for a personal response in their future life, then it will become an important way to contribute to, and I quote here from Laudato Si, the educational challenge we face today as integral education seeking to shape more enlightened and responsible ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ellen. First, thank you so much for being so respectful of time, because that allows us to share more, and also for your call to that reciprocity, to this two-way relationship, to walk away from indifference and to see how people should be outraged. I will stay on with these phrases in order to comment a bit more. Our next speaker will be Nicolas Standard from Gloria del Vives Homo, from encounter to social change in service learning. Nicolas, you can take the floor.
And I want to share my screen, but the other participant should
problema,
stop.
Nicolas.
Yeah. Ellen, you should stop sharing your screen, because I get the message that I cannot share my screen.
Ellen ya dejó de compartir. Sí, Ellen ya dejó de compartir.
Yeah, Ellen has stopped sharing her screen.
Now it should be okay. Yes?
Okay.
Okay, and then here.
Nicolás, para que se pueda ver como modo presentación.
Nicolas, could you share it in a presentation mode?
Ahí tienes que pinchar. Ahí sí, muy bien.
Great.
Yes?
Yeah, you're doing great.
Can I start?
Sí, puedes comenzar.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Well,
can start.
Yeah, okay. So I will build on the presentation of Ellen. She presented a global view, And I will start with the personal encounter, and then we will move to how service learning can also build to peace and to social change. And I start with a small introduction. Many people know probably this expression of ad majorem Dei gloriam, to the greater glory of God, which you can see in many illustrations, and also that is used in Jesuit education by the word of magis. The whole question is, if we everything that we are doing is to the greater glory of God, what is then the greater glory of God? And there we have a very nice expression by Irenaeus, one of the church fathers, who says that God's joy, God's glory is in fact the human being fully alive. But his sentence goes a bit further, because then he says, and what does it mean, a person who is fully alive? That means that the person is also able to see God. And so then we have a next question. What does it mean to see God? And there, one of the sentences by Ignatius of Loyola says, one has to seek and find God in all things, in all human beings. And as Ellen has already pointed out, there is a preferential option for the vulnerable, for the poor, for the excluded, and todo amar y servir. So put in another way is the sentence by Schillebeeckx that Ellen quoted already. God discloses God's self as a God of the living who is close enough to touch. So it's not only a transcendence, but it is in the persons that we encounter that we can find God. And this leads to the importance of encounter. So how to realize service learning within the vision of spirituality. The thesis that we propose is that service learning takes the encounter with persons in vulnerable situations as a starting point, and that this encounter is often the foundation to strive for structural justice, solidarity, peace, sustainable development. So what we need is also a spirituality of encounter in order to move to the other aspects. And that's what I would like to develop a little bit by using different authors, different disciplines, different religions. I start with a reflection by Levinas, who is a well-known French philosopher, a Jewish philosopher. And basically, he says that one of the threats of the academia of universities is that we function within totality. We have the idea that we can know everything. But his point is that this knowledge is finite. The knowable always exceeds the known. And the major correction to that is the infinity of encounters, of relationship, of experience, of proximity with the other. In other words, the ethics of encounter, of meeting people, is more important than the knowledge. He's not saying that knowledge is not important, but the importance of the encounter is very, very important. And that's a value for service learning. So what does it mean, encounter? And here I get inspired by a specialist in Indian studies. So that has nothing to do with service learning. And he proposes 3 attitudes: care first, learn from, and connect histories. And we can link that also with stories that we find in the Bible, where you have similar exchanges of Jesus with people and in the Gospels. Let us start with care first. What does it mean? When we hear the word care, there is a double meaning. First, there is to care about, to have a sincere interest, attention to be concerned about. But then there is also care for, which means to ensure someone's well-being. So what is important in this relationship is the priority of the other. That's put in another way what Ellen proposed. So it's not just helping the other. No, the other is more important than myself. And these are ideas also by Mark Freeman. So to put it in another way, service learning is not the selfie culture. Now in the selfie culture, we take a picture of ourselves. We no longer need the other to take a picture of ourselves. That's very strange because in the past, when you want to take a picture, you always need the other. So if we want to be in reciprocity, in relationship, in interpersonal relationships, these are aspects that are pointed out by the ethics of care, also in the feminist and feminine ethics. We need the other, or more importantly, the other is prior to what I do and I can. And concretely, that means that we are attentive to fragility, to uncertain, and to the vulnerable, not only in the other, but in myself. It means that I have to learn the language of the other. And that's not only intercultural, not only other English, Spanish, or whatever, but that we have to learn the language of young people, of groups, and that we encounter. And when we have to learn the language, we are confronted with our own limits as well. And it is through this caring that it is transformative, because these encounters regularly question my own motives and my right to study anything or to do anything in relationship with others. So this was the first aspect. Care first. Second is to learn from. So service learning is not only to learn about, but to learn from, the aspect that Ellen already pointed out. So it's a capacity to move beyond one's own horizon and to be transformed by the other. One of the Jesuit generals used to say, we have to educate education that's educate men and women for others. Today, we would add to that, it's not only for others, but it's together with and also starting from the other. It's especially this relational reciprocity. It's also a question of being transformed and transform our own categories. So it's through this specific encounter with others that we have to put into question our own prejudices, our actions, our ways of thinking. So it's a transformation of the knower from infinite to infinite. We start a link back with Levinas. We think that we can understand the other completely. No, it's through the encounter that
Nicolás, quedan 2 minutos.
Yes, I discovered the infinite. It's also searching for the beautiful in the other and learn from the something from someone one despises. Finally, it's a question of connecting histories. Every person is a story. In the encounter, I meet another person with his or her own story. And the challenge is that this story becomes part of my own story. So what is your story? What is my story? And how can that be part of my own story? My conclusion, the encounters are not merely a refuge for personal fulfillment. So service learning is not only, I have a good feeling with that. No, it is a basis through this encounter to discover structural and institutional dynamics of injustice. And so it's an appeal to move to justice, peace, and sustainable development. And this is possible through reflection and academic learning, not only reflecting on my experience, but also linking it with academic insights. And to give a concrete example that will be given by Katja in a few minutes, how a person with a spirituality worked for peace and justice and more equality in the world. And You probably do not know the name, but during the summer, Pope Francis started the process of beatification of Robert Schuman. That's my presentation.
Muchas gracias, Nicolás. Qué
Thank
maravilla.
you, Nicolas. It is great to go in depth about service learning aspects. And as you said, we have to leave this selfie culture in these times that we have been in our homes in front of a computer. So it's a challenge for us to go to encounter of others and how this methodology can help us. So now Katia Reinders will speak about the role of service learning in the construction of Europe. Lessons learned from the transformative spirituality of Robert Schuman, father of Europe. Katia, you can start.
Thank you, Chantal. Yes, so this is the title of the presentation.
I apologize, Katia. I need to take the floor. Please try to speak slower so we can also be mindful of interpreters to convey the message the best way for everybody.
Yes.
Puedes comenzar.
My screen is stuck. Nothing is moving. Do you hear me still?
¿Te escuchamos bien, Katia? Si quieres, sal de la presentación.
We hear you okay. Maybe you can leave your presentation and go back again.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let's try again.
Sí.
Ahí se ve el PowerPoint.
We do see your
Yes,
PowerPoint.
that works. Okay, thank you. Sorry
Funciona.
for that. Okay, so the outline of the presentation is that we will first explore the context, Europe at the time of the formative years of Robert Schuman, to then look into the spirituality of Robert Schuman and many of his of other Catholic intellectuals of his day, and then look at the transformative character of that spirituality. Then we will look into who was Robert Schuman, who is considered the father of Europe. And then to fully understand his vision on the construction of Europe, it's important to understand his idea of solidarity that was the underlying and also the essential principle of the solidarity for his construction of Europe. And finally, we will, of course, look into service learning and the lessons we can learn from the case of Schuman. So just to give a context of where we are at in time, Robert Schuman was born in 1886. He died in 1963. So that shows immediately that he survived 2 world wars. But very interesting on the geopolitical arena in his formative years, the years leading to the Great War, there was this balance of power in Europe. In the interwar years, there was imperialism, communism, fascism coming up. In the intellectual arena, there were many social injustices, mainly because of industrialization, but also still the aristocracy that was in place. And then the Enlightenment thinking was very much on rationalism and empiricism, and they tried to give answers to society, but for many people that wasn't enough. And so there was this need for a new social and moral order, and there were many people, many intellectuals in that they were looking for a new social and moral order. So what was going on in this, behind this, against this complex background was that the church also was trying to find its place in this new cultural and intellectual context. And as a counter reaction to Enlightenment thinking that found its inspiration in the classical era, Romanticism came up, and they were exploring the medieval sources, the medieval era, as a source of inspiration for a new social and moral order. And so what happens then is that the gospel as such becomes more apparent. There is a clear call for social action. There is this active movement of drawing people out of the margin into a community, and also the personal Christian consciousness comes to the forefront. And as these ideas come to the forefront, and by the way, not always very much welcomed by the church at that time, this theologically translates into several ressourcement movements in the 20th century. And that inspires on becoming a change agent in a complex society that they found themselves in. And so many Catholic intellectuals, they become very actively engaged in these movements, and often at a very high price. Some were even killed during the Second World War by the fascist regime. So what we see is that these Catholic intellectuals, they took part in many spiritual retreats. One of these abbeys that organized the retreats was the Abbey of Maria Laach in Germany. They were abbeys that were refounded based on the medieval Benedictine monastic model. And Maria Laach played a crucial role in the spiritual formation of many Catholic intellectuals of that day, and also in their understanding of society. And it is through the spiritual participation, as they came to understand it, of all in the liturgy and also in the Eucharist, that all were being invited into some kind of communal mission, which means that they would become active participants and change agents in social life. So not just going to church, but then doing something very concrete. So participating in spiritual life then was to be sent on a mission to transform social life from the inside out. And we see very much the resemblance with what Ellen was saying before. But then Robert Schuman, who was he? He was considered the father of Europe. You see the little map there. He was from the very contested area Alsace-Lorraine, which lies on the boundary line with France and Germany. Once it belonged to Germany, once it belonged to France. And so he had to change nationalities several times. And he tried always to take care of the refugees, whether they were German or French, depending on the situation. And he was known to be very integer. He had a great sense of humor. He was very reflective and very modest. And actually he wanted to become a priest, but then a good friend said, the priests of the future, they will wear suits. And so he took this idea of a lay apostolate very seriously, and he took it into his political role. And then during the Second World War, he was captured by the Germans and placed under house arrest. He was interrogated several times, but was able to escape. But then in 1950, 5 years after the war, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France. And he had the task to come up with some kind of construct to bring Germany and France closer together. And so he constructed and announced the European Community of Coal and Steel, which served as the basis of the European Union as we know it today. And it was very revolutionary at the time, because there was a lot of hatred because of everything that had happened. But what he was able to do is put France and Germany on an equal level and make their common interest known, so that they would both go for the same common interest. So what was his idea of solidarity then? That this Schuman Declaration, what he declared, it was not just an act to attain peace, it was much more than that. It rather came from years of coming to terms with a society and finding a foundation for a new social and moral order. He was looking for a just society. That was the real quest that he was on. And so he made it the mission of Europe, and so also the raison d'être, or the reason for the existence of Europe. And so, as Ellen already explained, if you want peace, work for justice. And that was what he put as an essential principle. It was solidarity, it was a spiritual ideal, the ideal of equality and a shared humanity, which he put at the essence of this construct. So what he believed also was that this ideal is not enough. What is needed is finding ways to give expression to this ideal and to materialize it in a very concrete way. And so what Schuman did was to place it at the core of Europe's existence and make it Europe's mission to transform European society from the inside out. So solidarity then becomes a transformative principle of which the outcome is still unknown. But as you can see here, you saw it as an act of faith. It's an act of the will. It's something you decide to do. And the condition for it to be successful is that the other person, and in this case, it was France regarding Germany and the other way around, as sharing in the same human nature. So that was absolutely essential in the construction of Europe. What then are the lessons?
Ya quedan 2 minutos.
Yes, thank you. What then are the lessons learned for service learning? Well, first of all, I think it's clear that it's necessary for students today when they follow a service learning course to understand the times, the days that they are living in, to explore and question the existing culture and structures as they are presented to them today. Academic learning then should not just inform students or give them theory as such, but to challenge them to wrestle with society as it is today. And then second, inspire them in a lived spirituality. Students should be invited and challenged to reflect upon society as it is, but then also explore some kind of an ideal or a vision of how society could or should be, and then let that become some kind of driving force for who they are and what they want to do today and in the future. We also see that within, and Nicolas mentioned it already, in an actual encounter with the other, when the student is at the service of the other, the student is challenged to see the other as fully human, to see them as a person. And so we need to challenge students to explore some kind of commonality in that relationship that is meaningful, and in that way also experience some kind of deep but also transcending sense of a shared humanity, which is the solidarity, like Schuman meant it. And then once the course is finished, I think it's very important then students are to be sent out in a transformed way to position themselves again in society as a change agent that takes on responsibility in society, holding on to the ideal and having some sense of a shared humanity, and in that way transform society from the inside out. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Katia.
Thank you so much, Katia, for your invitation. How we also invite students to get familiar with the times they live through, and also ask ourselves how much we know about our time and about our situation, what the situations are that are challenging us today. Thank you so much for inviting us to keep reflecting. We will now take a look at the next presentation by Lili Liarcena and Agnes Saboral from the Philippine University, and they will be sharing Social Justice in Jesuit Education, a case study on the implementation of service learning in the Ateneo de Davao University from the Philippines. We are all ears. You can share your screen.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen.
Muy bien. Se ve perfecto, puedes comenzar.
You can start.
Oops. Can you see my screen?
La vemos perfecta, Lilibet. Yes.
Okay,
It's
thank
okay.
you
Yes,
so
perfectly
much.
clear.
Warm greetings and profound gratitude for this opportunity to share our research entitled Social Justice in Jesuit Education, a case study on the implementation of the service learning in the Ateneo de Davao University by Jester G. Abo-Abo, myself, and Agnes Sagaral. The Ateneo de Davao University is a Filipino Catholic and Jesuit university in southern Philippines. To begin, the ultimate goal of Jesuit education is to form students to become person for others. It is a response to the invitation of Christ to serve the least of our brethren. Let me quote Father Pedro Arrupe of the Society of Jesus. Today, our educational objective must be to form men for others, men who will live not for themselves, but for God and his Christ. For the God-man who lived and died for all the world, men who cannot even conceive of love of God, which does not include love for the least of their neighbors. Men completely convinced that love of God, which does not issue injustice for men, is a farce. Father Pedro Arrupe is the inspiration behind the implementing office of the service learning program in our university. This unique characteristic of Jesuit education is based on the fundamental aspect of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, where he urges to constantly reflect and discern the meaning of one's experience as a way to ascertain its authenticity, to recognize where the Spirit of God is leading. The core of Jesuit education is the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. It is a collection of his meditation, prayers, and contemplative experience of the scripture. However, unlike any other spirituality book, it is meant to be experienced ideally within a 30-day retreat. It also serves as a manual for spiritual directors in guiding people towards spiritual freedom and intimate participation with God's activity on earth. Essentially, it is intended for the person's encounter with the truth, which requires one to continually look into the entirety of the experience to know how God is inviting them to respond. This process is crucial, and for St. Ignatius, one must be guided by the spiritual director who has responsibility for facilitating one's progress in reflection. Its pivotal dynamic points to the teacher's distinct role in leading their students towards truth. For here, an Ignatian pedagogy was born where Ignatian values are embodied in the entire teaching learning process, as stated in the International Commission on the Apostolate of Jesuit Education, ICAJ. At Ateneo de Davao University, service learning is enshrined in its renewed strategic plan in line with its identity and core principles as it defines according to the AFIRE: transformative administration, integral formation, excellent instruction, robust research, and vibrant engagement. To quote, it is as an institution that actively lives the Jesuit mission, that is service of the faith, promotion of justice, sensitivity to cultures, interreligious dialogue, and reconciliation with creation, the Ateneo de Davao University frames its praxis based on the ground, faith-based discernment, always responding to where God calls for transformative engagement. It has integrated for years into the professional courses to provide an opportunity for the students to learn and develop their professional competencies and inspire them to respond concretely to the needs of the communities as institutionalized in the university strategic plan, which has the following goals, namely, to utilize the service learning mechanism to formation of the ADU sui generis leaders, to institutionalize service learning as a mechanism for students and faculty engagement with partner communities, to ensure interface between academic and research and engagement, maximizing the service learning pedagogy. This has been sustained to 2025, and I quote, by 2025, ADU has continued and enhanced the utilization of service learning as a pedagogy, at least one professional subject in all academic departments. The service learning model in the Ateneo de Davao University manifests the relationship of 5 fundamental elements of Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, namely context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. The context of learning begins with recognizing the life experiences of the student. Teachers must understand how the students create perspective and how they see and process reality, both externally and internally. In so doing, students become more prepared to experience new facts, concepts, and principles. However, it is not merely an intellectual and cognitive exercise, but it also taps the affective experience of the student. The Ignatian pedagogy asserts that when intellectual grasp is not enriched by internal movements, such as feelings, the learning will not move the person to action. That is why reflection is the center of the Ignatian pedagogy, as it captures the meaning and value of what is being studied. With reflection and well-discerned implications of experience, students get to identify appropriate action that addresses the needs of the under-resourced communities and the marginalized. As a formative process, reflection liberates and urges the students to move beyond knowing and undertake action. For St. Ignatius, love is shown in deeds, not in words. Therefore, Ignatian pedagogy moves the student to make interior choices that become externally manifested. The paradigm ends with the final element of evaluation. It does not only measure the student's academic mastery, but more on the holistic growth as persons for others. Here is an example of an SOP experience from the chemistry department doing a water quality analysis with our community partner residing beside the city's dam site. This case study is focused on how service learning has been instrumental in allowing members of the Ateneo de Davao community to understand and appreciate the values of Jesuit education. In this study, 36 respondents were interviewed, administrators, faculty, students, and alumni. They were purposely identified based on their direct experience, participation, and involvement in the planning, development, and implementation of service learning in the Ateneo. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, the movement restriction, the data gathering was conducted online through a focus group discussion or key informant interview using virtual platforms. All the invited respondents were asked to fill out an online informed consent form where the study's objectives were stated. All ethical considerations were ensured in the conduct of the study, consistent with the standards set by the university. Designed as a case study, the researchers employed a semi-structured interview to gather in-depth data. The respondents were asked primarily on what specific Ignatian value they have understood and appreciated more through their service learning experience. All recorded interview was transcribed and its verbatim transcription was analyzed using thematic analysis. Using Braun and Clark's approach in thematic analysis, initial codes were generated in identifying interesting features from the data set. Potential themes were grouped by gathering all data relevant to each potential theme. Further analysis of initial themes was done to refine the relationship of the coded data to form the specific theme. Based on the thematic analysis of the verbatim of the interview and focus group discussion, the most common Ignatian values that were identified were magis and cura personalis. The Ignatian value of magis, a Latin word for more, best manifested among people who despite difficulty and challenges are trying to do more, the greater, the better for God and for God's people. Martin 2012. It is subtly accentuated to an official motto of the Society of Jesus for a greater glory of God, or Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, which St. Ignatius himself has extensively taught his fellows Jesuits. Another Ignatian value that all respondents recognize is cura personalis, a Latin word that translates to care of the person. In the service learning, students can enter into the reality of the community partners through their engagement. In this immersive experience, students become conscious of the various needs of the community and the common social issues begin to make sense to them. For Peter Hans Kolvenbach, former Superior General of the Society of Jesus, cura personalis is impelled by the spirit of magis. He explains that it is expressed in human acts of giving and receiving. For the administrators, these are their insights. The Ateneo de Davao is very strong in forming leaders for Mindanao, I guess initially for Davao region, and this activity brings the students in a personal contact with people of Davao regions and Mindanao, and that will surely have a lasting impact. For the faculty members, these are some of their insights. From service learning, my students would realize through reflection that their work is for the benefit of other people, for the common good. When asked what Ignatian value became prominent in the service learning experience, both students and alumni members have identified that it made them appreciate the profound meaning of faith that does justice. Often they considered having faith to a mere expression of religiosity. Still, in the service learning, They realize that our Christian faith is a radical call to attend to the needs of those who are in the margin, those who are neglected and left behind, those who are often considered as others. One insight is, as I quote, it is definitely aligned with the mission of the Ateneo to form students to be men and women, for others to be future leaders. This is resonated by an alumna. It is an opportunity to apply our learnings and skills in the class to real world problems and needs, since we tackle real concerns and made a change in the community to help improve their community life. These insights capture the aspiration of Jesuit education for justice as it seeks to provide a transformative experience and how the youth look at themselves and others, at social issues and other forms of injustice in human society. Let me end by the conclusion. In this case, the Ateneo de Davao University, service learning provides an opportunity for its members to grasp the deeper meaning and to bring out the identity that the university hopes to transform. As a Jesuit institution that embodies the Ignatian spirituality, service learning provides a clear path to be more conscious and attentive to how God calls one to share in his salvific mission of promoting justice and the common good, a fundamental Christian vocation made known in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Thank you for your kind attention.
Muchas gracias a ti, Lilibet, para compartirnos y por...
Thank you, Lilibet, for inviting us to go through this path, to see how we are experiencing this in our higher education institution, how this can be seen and experienced by students. And thank you for sharing your model, Lilibet. Now,
thank you. It's a pleasure.
Now, Andrés Peregali will speak about inclusive formative experiences, a path towards developing a transformative spirituality. Andrés, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches. Voy a empezar entonces con
Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm opening up the screen, and if you don't see my projection, please let me know. I'm Andrés Peregari. We still don't see. You look black and the screen looks black as well. Now we do see you though.
¿Ahora se logra ver?
Dice, no, se ve una pantalla negra completa. Ahí sí, Andrés.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Bueno, gracias a todos.
Thank you all. This presentation is called Inclusive Formative Experiences, a path to develop a transformative spirituality. I will talk about one experience in particular, but I will frame it in institutionalization effort when we talk about service learning of a training inclusive experiences in the Catholic University of Argentina. We work together with Claudio Puli and my colleague Hermida. This is the scheme that I will be following the layout that was suggested for the paper: introduction, methodology, results, and discussion. I will try to make it clear that service is an experience that builds fraternity. It makes us brothers and sisters, and it makes us understand spirituality as the intrinsic, deep notions that go beyond religiousness or one faith in particular, even though they include them. And of course, it turns us into brothers and sisters, as Pope Francis invites us to do. Having said this, I will talk about a theoretical practical seminar on social commitment and social problems that is framed in inclusive training experiences that the Catholic University for Argentina has developed for a couple of years now that increasingly consolidate. And these aim at finding a solution to social problems in societies, promoting the inclusion of students. This is how we frame it theoretically and conceptually in the definition of service learning. And we believe that these experiences contribute to find and strengthen the entity of higher Catholic institutions and the construction of polis, that is what is common and what belongs to all of us, not just of university for itself, but for a university that shares what it does as a network of life from an encounter with the others. These inclusive experiences that are being developed in the university have this experience of service learning as a background. This is the theoretical and practical seminar and social commitment that we have conducted so far since 2014. EFI are formative interdisciplinary experiences that belong to philosophy and theology area of thought, and we carry out together with the university and a number of different organizations as a framework that define these inclusive training experiences as a solidarity-based experience promoting spirituality, these experiences, and I would like to make a focus on the term experiences because this is something that happens to me, it transforms me, it calls upon me. It is an opportunity, as you can see on the right of the screen, in order to integrate and train experts in humanity. What is it that we are called upon integrating? Whatever is fragmented. This is why the Pope invites us to the global compact on education, considering the hand, the head, and the soul. And therefore, irrespective of education, of religion, giving way to the expression of education, we need to give way to our religious experiences, should pull the achievement of a spirituality understood as a motivation that is part of projects and life commitments, the motivation of the mystique that inspires utopia and causes that move us as humanity. And this has to be lived through and expressed in a personal, social, and institutional dimension. When we develop the EFIs, we study the causes for inequality, the causes for social problems. We relate faith, reason, and social commitment, finding how we should understand the society as a polyhedric shape. I will talk about a number of performances or evidence of students or community stakeholders and the teachers that work in this training experience. So you get to see the mesh behind that gets interwoven when integrating, knowing, being an expert in humanity. This is a group of students that engaged in a service learning project. They consider how to integrate being able how to do being and knowledge, integrating all the experiences. At the theoretical and methodological pillars of these experiences, we say that a university training needs to develop competencies, skills, and abilities, knowing how to be and being. Of course, that will bring together achievement of humanity and a meeting of encounter. Teachers have to facilitate service as a process and learning as a process, to give feedback. We know it takes a long time and a lot of effort. There's a lot of professionalism required in accompanying service learning projects. You have to know how to do this, and you have to learn how to do it. And we need to integrate the dimension of spirituality in the higher education institutions. Pope John Paul II talked about fragmentation between the soul and the body, between the spiritual field and the earthly field. And it's a challenge for all us to learn it again, learning it with the challenges of our day and age, of our time. So the formative experiences, inclusive formative experiences, and the theoretical and practical seminar has been conducted for the last 8 years. It calls upon close to 300 students. These have been conducted 15 times so far, and the purpose is to strengthen academic training, personal and professional training of students from the design, implementation, and evaluation of a service learning project, considering the development of a transformative spirituality to promote a political role when creating the polis, the common, analyzing the causes for inequality, and incorporating the prophetic dimension to life and to profession. The prophet is he who denounces the sin, denounces injustice, and announces hope and salvation. You can see an example later on of a service learning project that was carried out at the Rodrigo Bueno neighborhood between students of journalism and a specific undertaking in gastronomy. What about the characteristics? We are opening up the black box so that it comes to light in these inclusive formative experiences, considering the seminary. We have a number of characteristics of the end product of the project. It should meet all the stages of the journey of the service learning project. It should be related to the programs. It should be interdisciplinary. It should contribute to strengthen the link between faith, reason, social involvement, and experience. And on the right of the screen, you have a few projects based on which this experience has developed itself. These are the themes, culture of a meeting, the design of the project, implementation and evaluation and performance. And the methodology, we worked with community and with others, calling upon community stakeholders, alumni, and other members to feedback on the different stages of the project implementation and evaluation, reflection and feedback as a clear aspect. You have 1.5 minutes left. Some results in order for me to wrap up and discussions. And these ITEs are consolidated based on the institutionalization project of the university. We can analyze quantitative and qualitative techniques. They contribute to build a culture of meeting when they strengthen the professional and personal training background. And this shows how this institutionalizes in the university. It helps build an us, the dream of all being brothers and sisters, training on a way of being and doing, university, inviting to transformation. This is why students say that training an expert professional in humanity, as is the project of the university, is to train, as the paradigm says, the Ledesma paradigm says, the best for the world. And here we have a few reflections from some students who point out to the experience's importance because they strengthen expression in front of being outraged or in front of cowardice, and how to make decisions based on a number of problems. To conclude, it says that it provides a response to spirituality by laying down paths to a fraternal and service-based culture of everyone and of groups, because we walk hand in hand life projects. It's not just the head, hands, heart, and souls, and insisting upon the golden rule, as Nieves Tapia was saying yesterday, in connection to religions, but going beyond finding this experience as a space for fraternity. This generates constant institutionalized practices, and it favors the achievement of an institutional culture that brings spirituality together. It's transformative. It is a big opening, a meeting of souls, as can be seen on this image. And in wrapping up, I would like to share the book that, in the role of being a member of the Catholic University, but of CLICE as well, is being presented in the framework of this symposium with authors here on this panel session, as is the case of Ellen, that contributes to reflecting and to finding responses in connection to this question, how to achieve transformative spirituality based on service learning experiences. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andres, so much. There's no better way to communicate one's experience than with Bautista, a student who is participating in this meeting. He wrote that this was a transformative experience. This is a clear example of what you have just shared. Thank you, Andres, and thank you, Bautista, for sharing your experience on the chat. Maybe we can then exchange some more. Andres, I was thinking about knowing, being, and knowing how to do, how we come down to knowing how to coexist with others, because, well, this is what we are after, as you say. We will now move on to learning and enjoying the next presenter, Pilar Romero. She will be talking about engendering empathy towards persons with disabilities among the youth involved in ministry from the Santo Tomas Spain University, Philippines. You can take the floor.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, so. Okay, so the research and the service learning is about engendering empathy towards persons with disabilities among the youth involved in parish ministry. Persons with disabilities
Pilar,
are considered
por favor,
part
poner
of
en
the
presentación
marginalized
la pantalla.
society.
Pilar, please, can you share your presentation in full screen? Presentation mode.
That's it. Okay, thank you. Persons with disabilities are considered part of the marginalized sector in society. Their marginalization stems from conditions of extreme poverty, exclusion, discrimination, and the denial of basic services offered to their peers without disabilities. Catholic universities, as institutions of higher learning, impelled by the quest for excellence, and more importantly, by the call to serve the vulnerable and the marginalized, could focus their attention on persons with disabilities. This is one of the ways they could witness to their identity as institutions that uphold human dignity and as faithful adherents to Catholic social teaching, which is radically inclusive and which values community inclusion in supporting individual dignity. Catholic universities are institutions of higher learning. Thus, while service to the vulnerable and marginalized is primarily driven by mission, their being universities compel them to make their engagements with them systematic and scientific. Such engagements, aside from engendering empathy in the students, must develop in them critical thinking, career exploration, moral development, the ability to engage in diverse world in an understanding of one's spiritual and or religious reality. For Catholic universities, service learning is the most fitting approach in the engagement with community. The University of Santo Tomas, the Catholic University of the Philippines, maintains a vibrant and extensive community development program as part of its mission to form competent and compassionate professionals committed to the service of the church, the nation, and the global community. It is vibrant and extensive because all the 63 undergraduate programs offered in various faculties, colleges, and institutes participate in the community development program through service learning projects that articulate the specific nature of the programs. One of these programs, the Bachelor in Special Needs Education of the College of Education, is geared towards the training and formation of future special needs education professionals. Students of special needs education are not only trained to become competent professionals, they are also formed to engage in advocacy, give witness to the university's core value of compassion, and to uphold the dignity of persons with disabilities. This training and formation are articulated in the learning outcomes of the program. These are manifest critical, reflective thinking, and problem-solving skills in planning, monitoring, assessing, and reporting learning processes and outcomes specific to special needs learners. Practice, professional, ethical, and collaborative teaching standards sensitive to local, national, and global realities to guide one's decision-making and action in various school settings and situations. Advocate for students' rights, for children's rights, equity, community, nationalism, and democratic ideas. And finally, demonstrate compassionate and committed service as a response to the needs of the community characterized by the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. During their final year in the university, students enrolled in the special needs education program are required to undertake a research-informed service learning project that encapsulates the knowledge, skills, and values they have developed as they complete the required professional and specialization courses that are part of their curriculum. In this paper, an action research, informed service learning, aimed at engendering empathy towards PWs among the youth involved in parish ministry. Pia will discuss the method and the results.
Thank you,
Pia?
Dean. Yes, thank you, Dean. As shown in the table, the researchers chose Knights of Columbus Christ the King Parish in Quezon City, Philippines, because the parish itself showed initiative to start a people with disability ministry. The participants of the SLP were 4 adolescents, ages 15 to 20 years old, who are part of the youth ministry in the parish. For the intervention, the first 3 sessions of the Disability Sensitivity Program were 3-hour sessions divided into 5 steps. Introduction, interview with the community about their attitudes that guided the researchers in the creation of their action plan. Summary of the lessons and the participants learned from the program, which ended with the post-interview. The second part of the program is the application of the participants' knowledge and gathering of their journals. They were invited to attend Special Olympics training and interacted with persons with disability. For triangulation, the researchers used RoboPhoto, FGD, Participants' Journal, and researchers' observation. Field notes underwent structural analysis to form themes using within and cross-case analysis and repertory grid. Salient points said by the participants were grounded together and classified into 5 themes. Allow me to discuss the simulacrum of the study. The themes were sympathizing, handling, acquainting, progressing, and empathizing. Sympathizing is the theme that emerged during the FGD, targeting the prior knowledge of the participants on persons with disability. They were asked, when you see someone with special needs, what do you usually feel? The participants' responses range from, I feel pity for them because they were not really born like that. Or I also feel sorry because I can't do anything for them and I don't know how to help them. This finding is similar to the work of Kaffermain and Jury Vishem in 2013. They explained that this sympathy is due to the perception that persons with disabilities are helpless, they are disadvantaged in life and worth being pitied. The next theme is handling. It refers on how the participants approach a certain situation that involves persons with disability. This theme was uncovered by asking, when you see a person with disability struggling, what do you usually do? Participants expressed their hesitation to approach persons with disability who needed help because of past experiences, which is consistent with the assertion of Janet Al in 2015 that inaccurate beliefs towards people with autism instigate fear among those who witness untoward situations where persons with disabilities are involved. By the end of the implementation of the Disability Awareness Program, the researchers provided the participants the opportunity to interact with persons with disability. This is the acquainting stage, which is the next theme. The participants said that during the interaction, they were surprised that the persons with disabilities are good in certain sports during the Special Olympics training, and that they are even capable of teaching abled people. Participants reflected that their perspective of persons with disabilities changed from being scared to being inspired by them. This particular change in the participants' attitude towards persons with disabilities by virtue of their interaction is similar with the results of the research done by Yazbek et al. In 2004. Next theme is progressing. The researchers were asked on the benefits of Disability Awareness Toolkit to their community. The participants answered. They gained information that they may also share with others. They stated that it serves as a guide to gain knowledge about the different attitudes towards persons with disabilities. They mentioned that it will be helpful for their preparation in building a ministry for persons with disability in their own parish. This particular result of the study affirms the findings in the conducted by Williamson in 2014, where he concluded that the more the students learn about disabilities, the more accepting they became. And the last theme is empathizing. The participants showed empathizing behaviors when they directly state that the barriers between persons with disability and people without disability should be removed, and that we should all respect everyone's differences. This result is parallel to the study of Babick and Gardner in 2020, where they proved that children's greater empathy results in a better ability to understand others' feelings and a higher likelihood of responding in a more appropriate and sensitive manner. In conclusion, the service learning project allowed the students to perform their role of special education pre-service teacher. It fostered in them the will to regard persons with disability with dignity, love them, desire what is best for them. And most importantly, it immersed them in an advocacy that could contribute to the person with disabilities' human flourishing. From the University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines, thank you and good evening.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches para ti, ¿no es cierto?
Thank you very much. Good morning from Chile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What you are conveying is really interesting, and all the presentations are being interconnected. From Davos, they were telling us that students have to know where they are, because if we know where we are standing, we can be empathic with others. And this is a service learning that can be transformative experience, and knowing where others are standing. So thank you very much for your presentation. Now, Karina will share her presentation, Pedagogy of Frances and Spirituality in Service Learning. Karina, what can you share with us?
I will be presenting my slides, and there are points of coincidence with those who took the floor before. I will discuss about Pope Francis pedagogy, but before I would like to say that the ideal horizon where Cardinal Bergoglio moves is that of the Jesuit school, considering the Argentinian phenomenology and the big theoreticians of the people such as Scalone, but Romano Guardini with his idea of the symphony of the opposite and the doctrine of unity of transcendentals, the one who had the greatest influence in his thought. His motto is miserando atque eligendo. Jesus looked at Matthew with merciful love, and he chose him. Recognizing himself a sinner, he accepts himself chosen out of their mercy, and that is why he then practices it and teaches it. According to Scanone, this is the charisma, doctrine, and the style of government of Pope Francis. Mercy is expressed in gestures of tenderness, translating the love of God for us, and we can therefore offer to our next of kin and to society, unleashing the so-called revolution of tenderness.
Karina, parece que las personas que están escuchando en inglés sienten un eco.
People listening to the translation in English feel some echo. Can we ask translators to fix that? Is it better now?
En inglés,
Entonces, el primer punto que caracteriza
So the first point characterizes the spirituality of Pope Francis is mercy and the preferential choice for the poor. According to Pope Francis, reality can be better seen not from the core, but rather from the periphery. This is how we contemplate from the poorest and the smallest the contemporary world, their crisis, and the response the Church has to provide. The Pope asks us to hear the roar of the poor, that invites us to gestures of solidarity, but also to find structural causes for poverty and promote integral development. Among the most poor, we find our Mother Earth, to whom he dedicates an entire encyclical. The Evangelica Aurum describes, however, the dynamic of resolution to social conflict being inspired in the harmony of the opposing, reflecting this dialectic of opponents, as Guardini warns, in the two levels without missing or losing sight of dynamism. We come down to the unity of the contrary in a superior synthesis that does not stop conflict, but it doesn't get trapped on him. On both, unity, peace, and harmony are the criteria to keep moving forward. There's 4 priorities presented here as criteria for discernment. Time superior than space, unit prevails over conflict, reality is more important than idea, the whole is greater than the parts to it. These 4 principles are framed in the polar oppositions and image. The symbolical figure is the polyhedric shape. The challenges presented by education have always been at the heart and at the careful look by Pope Francis. Taking into consideration these elements that I went over quite quickly that define his thought, we can individualize a few principles from which pedagogy stems, that is characterized by the search of harmony between opposing elements, the pedagogy of harmony, for the social protagonism of the poor and secluded, and of course, the pedagogy of care and tenderness. In connection to harmony, in his several speeches to the world of education, the relation that he establishes between education, dialogue, art, beauty, creativity, and harmony. This search for harmony is always present in the 2 cornerstones: personal harmony that brings together heart, hands, and soul and head, and the educational compact that is broken. We need to recognize the modality principle that he uses when he moves about. He creates a mess, he wreaks havoc, and they are generating harmony thanks to a permanent tension that is generative and creative. For Bergoglio, oppositions make part of a fruitful story. Maybe the key, the hermeneutical key of searching for truth and the pedagogical method of access to deep knowledge in him is in the unit of the transcendental. For him, truth is never found on its own. A truth is such if it is good and if it is beautiful. Beauty understood not just as something that is pleasant or attractive, but as something that gives us a wonderful insight on the mystery. It opens up to deeper reality. It fascinates us. It takes us all carried away, and it at the same time sets us free. There's lots of abstract rationalisms and moralisms that would be cured from such a logic if we started thinking about reality first and foremost as beautiful, and then as truth and as truthful. As the truth and as truthful. All things go hand in hand together. We can talk about the pedagogy of the people. The preferential option of the poor places them in the role of active subjects, protagonists for change. We talk about education that should offer them what's necessary to develop their skill sets and to be empowered. But for that to be the case, it should be the right education to grow in them virtues without having them abandon their place of origin, and that it requests educators to go to the meeting of people, to go to the periphery, to provide an answer to the entire world. On the other hand, the pedagogy of affection or tenderness is at the heart of listening to those who suffer. In the experiences of suffering, we have this capacity of moving and deeply moving inside. Pain makes us close to mystery. They trigger existential questions that open up the sight, the view to transcendental issues, attitudes and behaviors that can be developed within this pedagogy of affection or tenderness, education to listen, education to look, the feeling of compassion, the attitudes that have to do with proximity and closeness, broad competencies that have to do with care for oneself, for others, for the world around us, and for the house that we have in common. These principles are applied then to service learning without intending it to be exhaustive. Service learning, on the one hand, is faced with antinomic notions and harmonies. One of the big strengths, as Nieves Tapia says, is in overcoming the old oppositions between learning content or developing competencies, between academic excellences and educational inclusion. Overcoming these oppositions has given way to a relation of reciprocal benefit, of virtuous cycle between learning and service. Service learning between truth, good and beauty. It offers a horizon of sense among the students who discover through service that studying is good enough and that whatever is learned can be a gift for others. Those who carry out a service learning experience find the purpose why they should study that goes beyond the quest for truth, that is acquiring knowledge, but also that of being good, looking for the common good, together with the big doses of care. These two purposes, truth and good, also include in a three-dimensional dimension beauty. It might not be immediately seen in a service learning project, but whatever is behind it in any service learning project is the opposite to beauty, that is ugliness. That is to say, if we understand ugliness by all those realities that generate shame, distortion, limit, and a number of characteristics that are present in those who we can do away without, that cause this social reality that we need to face from our project. Ugliness reclaims the injuries of these destroyed injuries that in a service learning experience, we are invited to touch with our hands, with a merciful heart, and with the competencies of reason to go deeper into the structural causes that provoke them, and to the extent possible, try to put them right based on the lessons learned at school. Beauty, therefore, is the promise of service learning, and it is the path to a mercy. The path to go is that of mercy. To conclude, I say that Pope Francis, in the conclusion of the Catholic Education Congress in 2015, suggested the attendees to reflect upon this in education. How can I implement acts of mercy? In the case of everyday life, we shall be judged by love. And this is what the deepest examination that we will have to sit for is all about. And the master, as Yara Lubick said, already set out the questions to us so we can prepare in advance. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you made me drink. The so-called works of mercy will be the tests that we will have to stand up to. God will be able to tell whether we exceeded those tests. As Nieves Tapia said, service learning is this proposal that prepares us not to acquire only the necessary competences to perform in society, but it gets us ready for the most important examination of our existence, the final examination. Thank you, Karina. I don't know whether it happens to you that I would like this to become a daily experience so we can keep sharing and going deeper into these calls, into these meetings that our colleagues are asking us to join when presenting their experiences. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your reflections, and also for bringing together so many concepts that would otherwise be so separated. I need to go read again your presentation because it's deeper than can be conveyed in the few minutes. So thank you now. And now, Sahaya Salvan will be sharing with us conceptualization of spirituality in the context of service learning from the International University College from Kenya. Sahaya, we can give you the floor.
Thank you.
Se ve muy bien.
Good evening from Nairobi. As you can see, I'm originally from India, but I'm a Catholic priest of the Order of Salesians of Don Bosco, serving in Nairobi, Kenya, and Tanzania as well for the past 29 years. So my presentation is going to bring together the East, the West, and Africa, okay? So conceptualizing spirituality in the context of service learning. What we have seen in the preceding presentations and a lot of literature that is around spirituality and service learning is that there is a reciprocal relationship between spirituality and service learning. So in terms of the influence of spirituality on service learning, in my opinion, spirituality has a greater role in motivating learners to involve themselves in service learning and become social transformers. On the other hand, what service learning does is to deepen one's spirituality. So that we know, and therefore the objective of this presentation is to examine how this spirituality may be conceptualized in the context of service learning, particularly when we want to do empirical studies. So this is basically a conceptual paper, and I would like to present 3 models of spirituality or 3 frameworks that could be useful for empirical research. So this is the outline. You can see there are 4 sort of bullets, but inclusive spirituality is my first model. The 4 pathways is my second model, and 4 expressions of spirituality is my third model. So inclusive spirituality. Social sciences that study the relationship between spirituality and religiosity today make a distinction and sometimes a separation between the two. And so I myself would like to see them interacting. And when they interact, in these two axes, we get 4 quadrants. In the first quadrant, we have a high level of religiosity, but low level of spirituality. So what you have here, extrinsic religiosity, what Gordon Allport called extrinsic religiosity, that spiritual aspect of religion in terms of meaning, compassion, are not integrated into one's religious practices. Now, if spirituality is low and religiosity is also low, then you have secularization. Neither religious nor spiritual. There is no search for meaning in terms of the transcendental elements of life. There is rejection or the neglect of creed, code, cult, and community of religion. On the other hand, we know in the Western societies today, more and more people claim to be spiritual, but not religious. So spirituality is high, but religiosity is low. But I myself would like to function in the 4th quadrant, where there is a high level of religiosity, that I function within an institutional religion, but all the time I'm exploring spirituality. Now, in the context of service learning, we could have individuals or learners situating themselves in any of these quadrants. But I suppose what could be happening as they feel accompanied in a spiritual process, even as they engage themselves in service learning, there is a movement from number 1 and 2 towards 3, at least 3, and if not 4. So that is what I call the inclusive spirituality, that takes into consideration that individuals might be falling anywhere in this spectrum of the relationship between religiosity and spirituality. Now, going on to the four pathways in spirituality, it is similar to what my colleague Mercy Pushpalata was presenting yesterday. I borrow from the Eastern religion or Hinduism, basically Hindu tradition. Hindu tradition has 4 pathways in spirituality or enlightenment or moksha. The first pathway is Jnana Marga. Jnana means wisdom or knowledge. Marga simply means way of knowledge, that somebody searches for truth as an end in itself, as knowledge, and that brings them to a transcendence of enlightenment and an experience of God. Not necessarily a personal God, but something beyond. The second pathway is a way of action through charity, through compassion, through involvement in the society. Karma Marga. Karma means action. The third way is a way of devotion, piety. The fourth way is a way of contemplation. So you can see the Indian tradition makes a distinction in spirituality between the way of devotion and the way of contemplation. Some of the Western traditions might put them together. But let us see what happens in the Jewish tradition, in the Hebrew scriptures. The Jnana Marga is loving the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your heart, with all your soul. So we can see a parallel between the Hebrew scriptures and the Indian mystical tradition of the 4 pathways. Now, coming to the Christian tradition, we can see this happening in the lives of what the Catholic tradition calls saints. People like St. Thomas Aquinas or even Bonaventure, seeking God purely through knowledge. And we know from Aquinas' story of identifying his own writing and his own philosophizing and theologizing as way of seeking God. And for example, Vincent de Paul, or even my own founder, Don Bosco, and so many people, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, I think their pathway to God was through charity, through compassion, through action. Thirdly, Teresa of Child Jesus, Saint Therese of the Bhakti Marga, through devotion of the path of the heart. Whereas the Raja Marga, which according to Eastern tradition is the highest form actually, is through contemplation, as we see in the lives of Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross. And to some extent, a lot of saints have even combined these pathways. And so here we have. Now, what is the connection between these four pathways and service learning? I think that we see a clear connection between the way of knowledge and way of action in service learning. And we hope it will lead somebody into a contemplative spirit, which then opens up for them a whole world of spirituality. And finally, the four expressions of spirituality. My first two models seem a bit abstract.
You have just 1 minute and a half.
Okay. So the four, what I would say is the four expressions when somebody gets into a contemplative attitude towards life, they discover that their spirituality has to be expressed in four pathways: a journey towards the self, an inward journey towards the self, an outward journey towards God or anything transcendent, and an outward journey towards others and the rest of creation. So in using Pope Francis' terminology, the journey towards others is Fratelli Tutti, the journey towards creation is Laudato Si. And so what I've done is I've presented three frameworks which have been borrowed from interreligious, cross-cultural, and interdisciplinary sources. And I hope empirical studies in service learning can benefit from these models and could be tested. Thank you very much.
Gracias a ti.
Thank you very much to you. It was very interesting. And I think that with your model, we can analyze our own service learning experiences in our institutions. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to hear you. And we are about to close our presentation sessions, which have been very enriching. And as I've been reading in the chat, we enjoyed them a lot. And now we will give the floor to Leah, nurturing a spirituality of interconnectedness and stewardship through service learning. Leah, you have the floor, that's right. So nurturing a spirituality of interconnectedness and stewardship through service learning from Philippines.
Yes, I get, okay, it's working.
Ahí necesitamos que lo pongas en modo presentación, Lea.
Please put it in the presentation mode.
Can you see it now in presentation mode?
Todavía no.
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, let me try again.
¿Puedes ponerlo en vista o ahí puedes pinchar?
You can adjust it to full screen mode, maybe.
All right. Okay. So full screen on my end.
La primera,
Okay.
ahí es. Ahí está.
Okay, is that okay?
No, no se ve como presentación, Lea.
Ah, no, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, last try.
Sí, inténtalo una vez más y no lo dejamos del
Yes,
otro modo.
you can have a last try. Otherwise, we leave it the way it is.
Okay. Is that good?
Ahora sí?
Okay, está muy bien, Lea.
Yes, it's perfect.
All right. Hello, good day to everyone. I'm Leah Guevara and a faculty member of the College of Arts and Sciences at Miriam College in the Philippines. My presentation is titled Nurturing a Spirituality of Interconnectedness and Stewardship Through Service Learning. Let me share something about our school. Miriam College is a Catholic institution in Quezon City, Metro Manila, Philippines, founded by the Maryknoll Sisters in 1926. At present, it offers basic and higher education that caters mostly to girls and young women and offers technical vocational curricular offering to adult learners. In 2015, it has expanded and opened a new campus in a province in Laguna, south of Luzon, and in 2 to 3 years, a new campus will open in Pampanga, north of Luzon. The institution envisions its students to have excellence with compassion and competence with soul. To achieve this vision, Miriam College lives by its core values of truth, peace, justice, and integrity of creation. These values are entwined into the very core of its institutional spirituality, which empowers the school community to live in mission, communion, and service. This has become even more relevant now that the school has adopted a fully online modality of learning. The pandemic situation compelled Miriam College to transition to fully online campus. In its commitment to learning continuity, the school established its online campus, KNOLER, or Knowledge and Online Learning Engagement and Resources. Presently, in its second year of implementation, students and teachers have already adapted and found creative and meaningful ways to do learning and teaching. This paper is an attempt to present service learning as a tool for nurturing spirituality among students, in particular, that of interconnectedness and stewardship, as students learn to connect with communities rather than just make them mere beneficiaries of services that they render. Service learning in Miriam College is currently applied in one of the courses named Nature, Culture, and Spirituality. From the service learning projects to student reflections and course evaluations, I aim to present service learning as a potent tool in living out one's faith and as an expression of spirituality that heeds the call of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. Service learning is an integral part of the curriculum of Miriam College, especially in the higher education unit. It traces its roots in the 1980s when a move to create a plan and implement the integration of social concern, including environmental concern, as selected subjects was created. To better equip the faculty, seminar workshops were conducted over the years and various kinds of integration took place to better equip the students of critical thinking and social engagement. In 2003, the Integration Development Committee became known as Service Learning Program under an institutional office. Thereafter, Miriam College took seriously pioneering service learning in the Philippines, starting with the various faculty orientation and sharing practices with higher education institutions. The school's commitment to the poor resulted to the continuous development of the service learning program in the higher education unit. And over the years, the service learning program in Miriam College has faced challenges of sustainability and continuity. At present, it is lodged under an office called Miriam Identity, Spirituality, and Mission Office, where I am a program coordinator. The role of MISMO is to set direction for service learning in the college unit, give orientation to both faculty and students, and assist faculty members in identifying partner communities where their students may implement their service learning projects. Attempts to implement service learning in the basic education units have been done through its existing social action program and currently by adopting the problem-based learning approach in teaching. Though there is greater need for faculty learning and faculty training, The availability of manuals for faculty, students, and partner communities suffices at present. Last school year, with the shift to a fully online modality, the higher education unit embarked on a major change in its course offerings. The result of which is one of these results is this course on nature, culture, and spirituality, which fuses the topics on local knowledge, ethnoecology, and a theology of mission, communion, and service that includes the church's social teachings. It applies a See, Discern, Act framework for students to examine complex problems in the society that affects the earth and the poor, to analyze these problems with the lens of the Catholic social teachings and come up with creative solutions demonstrating their skills, knowledge, and attitudes learned through a service learning project. Using service learning is vital in the course as it gives it a practical and understanding and practical application of secular and ecclesial understanding of integral sustainable development. Since the start of the pandemic, I've handled about 4 classes of this course. Each class implemented an average of 4 service learning projects. I went back to these projects as well as students' reflections and course evaluations, how they have expressed the spirituality of interconnectedness. How have these projects contributed to integral sustainable development, and how did this change the students' way of thinking, believing, feeling, and acting? How did it change them? The effect is important, but more so what they decide upon afterwards. Hopefully, through the interweaving of relevant content in the course, the students are able to make meaningful connections and real connections with partner communities and organizations while doing their service learning projects. Due to the limitations brought about by the pandemic, most of the service learning activities were done remotely, and in some cases, on-site following strict health protocols. Examples of which are advocacy campaigns done online, podcasts, webinars, community pantries that serve as feeding program in various communities. May I mention a few? Some students did well in identifying sectors related to their courses and solutions related to their programs or career industries. One of which is a group of tourism students, realizing that the tourism industry has been severely affected by the pandemic. This group chose to connect with the transportation sector and implemented a service learning project that allowed them to connect with public transportation drivers and raise funds for them. Another group, realizing the need to help their fellow students and youth in general. The students from the Multimedia Arts program created an online magazine in partnership with our Higher Education Guidance Center and published via Instagram and Facebook accounts. Some just thought of an interesting topic or a vulnerable sector close to their hearts. An example of which is this one, Beneath the Surface. It's a mini web series tackling the cosmetic or beauty industry, relating it to culture, spirituality, and care for the environment. Another one is PolitiFacts. Using Facebook and TikTok, a group of students launched a voter education and civic engagement campaign addressing the youth, encouraging them to participate in the upcoming Philippine elections in 2022. Lastly, Bayanihan, a fundraising campaign to support a feeding program of a Catholic parish church in Antipolo City through online selling of pre-loved items. From these examples, it can be said that these projects may be justified as an application of their learnings from the course. However, much more important than these is the fact that these students made certain connections with people, with communities, with one another, collaborating with each other, despite the challenge that this pandemic brought us. Their projects are responses to existing needs that pertains to nature, culture, and spirituality. The very platform and methodology speak of the current culture of the youth and their finding creative ways of connecting with people. This is how one realizes that oneness, the communion that expresses solidarity with other people, the service that is the expression of connection, stewardship and solidarity, of being one with nature and with one another, realizing that we are part of one human family. Moreover, This spirituality of interconnectedness is a response to the scriptural call to take care of all creation and a call to love one's neighbor. Even in Miriam's Magnificat, expressed in our celebration of the Eucharist, it finds inspiration to the very words of our Pope and articulated in Miriam College's vision, mission, core values, and spirituality. To underscore this spirituality and as inspired by Pope Francis, I quote, "Because all creatures are connected, each must be cherished with love and respect. For all of us as living creatures are dependent on one another." From Laudato Si. And from Fratelli Tutti, he says, "Let us dream then as a single human family, as fellow travelers sharing the same flesh, as children of the same earth, which is our common home. Each of us bringing the richness of his or her beliefs and convictions, each of us with his or her own voice, brothers and sisters all." Lastly, it is articulated in Miriam College's core value of integrity of creation, as we say, "We commit ourselves to care for the earth and to practice a lifestyle that sustains the health of the planet on which all life depends." In conclusion, this humble presentation hopefully have shared with you that service learning at the heart of Miriam College's mission, providing an education that is relevant and purposive in the world. True to its mission as a Catholic institution, it forms women leaders who go beyond themselves and be of service to the poor and the marginalized. Pope Francis said, "For all our hyperconnectivity, we witnessed a fragmentation that made it more difficult to resolve problems that affect all of us." Service learning becomes a tool of ensuring that students are able to connect to the world, aware of what is happening in the society, and providing expressions of creative solutions. Despite the challenges of the pandemic and the online learning setup, service learning becomes a valuable experience for students to undertake, not only for their own gains, but more so to expand themselves and be able to connect with vulnerable sectors of the society and attempt to provide relevant solutions, ensuring that it becomes a way for students to work together with these communities and organizations. This is the spirituality of connectedness, interconnectedness, and stewardship that come alive through service learning. This attempt as one of the courses offered at Miriam College may be a small step, but it is a step to make what Miriam College says in its vision mission statement. Miriam College commits itself to creating and living within our school community the very changes we seek to realize in the society. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Lea Guevara. Lea, por compartir.
Thank you so much, Leah, for sharing and for closing this wonderful panel that we had on service learning, a path to spirituality, and how today each one of us have followed our own paths. Regretfully so, something that affects our spirituality is time, and time runs against us. So I'd like to ask for a few things. The first one is to try to go to the page of the Congress, to try to enter the posters, leave your comments or doubts right there. Follow the presentations that come on the YouTube channel. And towards the end, in concluding, I should say that we all were connected. We all thought that maybe we have come down to reading Saint Luke, who is your brother or your sister, and how you can act with them. And with Leah, we talked about spirituality and connection. And today, because of the situation, we are far, but we are interconnected. And I would like to ask you to turn on your cameras so we can feel more connected, and so that we know that today it's 56 of us seeing how service learning can be a path to spirituality, how we can come not just to our students, but to the authorities, to other teachers, to professionals who are in the institutions. And I should say that in the few minutes that I am talking extra, please turn on your cameras to see who of us are behind the cameras. Maybe in a face-to-face Congress, we should have had the chance to exchange, to share coffee or to share our emails. And such as we turn on cameras, please take a look at each other's eyes. Let's recognize each other. And I will take a photo. Maybe we can say hello. We can have this kind of meeting. And maybe if at some other point in time, we can connect in person. Well, we shared this panel. We started a path to spirituality. We were filled up with shared experiences from various parts of the world on how service learning can be this path. So you will be invited. Some people are already showing a heart, and that's a very good idea. And this is how we'll be able to take a photo to know that we are quite a lot. And even when we might be far away, we can take a path together, close to our next of kin and to our brothers and sisters who are somewhere else. So thank you so much for this meeting, for sharing, and you are invited, as I just said, to come into the following of our Congress on our YouTube channels and to share the web page posters. This is a possibility that technology allows us to. I'd like to thank so much presenters for sharing their work and experiences. See each other later.